Okay, so let's get started. Hello to everyone. It's Wednesday. This is a time check. It's Wednesday, 9 December at 8 p.m. in Singapore. I'm Amina Mahmood, Deputy Director of the Singh Health Duke-NUS Global Health Institute. And on behalf of the Institute, I'm delighted to welcome all of you at our webinar today. This webinar series is titled Beyond Science, Issues of Access. And in the first webinar, we looked at more of the legal issues surrounding IP, intellectual property, and patent rights related to COVID-19 products. We had a really interesting discussion. And for those of you who missed it, please do go back into our link on our website and review it. Now, coming to today's webinar, we'll be looking more at the operational challenges of enabling access to essential vaccines. We look at it particularly from in the ASEAN region, but we'll be providing an international perspective as well as some national concerns and priorities. And as we see, there are lots of new vaccines kind of racing through the approval process and being delivered to frontline healthcare workers and even selected vulnerable groups in kind of record time. So the larger issue, so these few groups are getting it and will be getting it soon. But the larger issue of who, how, and when will a more universal access to vaccine be made possible must be kind of faced and discussed and kind of see what the challenges around are. And that's what I hope we'll be discussing today. So we have 6 experts kind of from a range of international, national, academic, and healthcare institutions who will be talking to us about these issues. And I'm really excited to kind of get their viewpoints on it because it's such a kind of nice broad range of people talking. But first, before we get to the speakers, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today, who's Dr. Michael Merson. So Mike is the founding director of our institute, our Global Health Institute, and we've been very grateful for his leadership over these last few years. He's also the founding director of the Duke Global Health Institute, which he led for over 10 years. He's a professor of global health at Duke University, and he's also a visiting professor and a dean special advisor on global health at NYU School of Public Health. In his previous post, he served as the director of the World Health Organization programs on diarrheal diseases and acute respiratory infections, and also led the WHO program on AIDS. He was the first dean of public health at the Yale University School of Medicine. And I could go on and on, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to turn over to Mike. But before I do a few housekeeping words, this webinar is being recorded. Please keep yourself on mute. You can post questions and answers in the question and answer box at any point, but they'll be answered at the end of the kind of presentation and the initial questions to the panelists. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Amina. Welcome, everyone. We have a very exciting topic. I would say probably the hottest topic right now in global health, the most urgent topic. And we have a wonderful program, which could take at least a whole day, but we have an hour. We'll probably go over a little bit. I think our speakers have agreed to stay with us a little bit longer. The first part of, I want to get right to the program. Amina has very succinctly explained that we are going to address the operational challenges in delivery of our COVID-19 vaccines. We have 2 sections. Our first section is going to look at more of a regional global perspective. And then our second section will look at the national level. And then hopefully we'll have time for discussion and questions. So we have up on the slides our first speakers. They have outstanding knowledge of the field. I'm just going to mention their names quickly. Ms. Susan Brown is the Director of Policy Engagement at GAVI. Luc Debruyne he was former CEO of Global Vaccines at GSK and is now a strategy advisor to the CEO of CEPI. CEPI and GAVI are key players in the delivery of vaccines, of the vaccine, which we'll hear about, I'm sure. And then Professor Krishna Udayakumar, who's director of the Duke Global Health Innovation Center and a professor of global health and medicine at Duke University, and will presenting a very exciting piece of research that he has related to vaccine access. So let's get started. Each speaker has 7 minutes. Because we are a little tight on time, I will be the timekeeper, but hopefully everyone will respect the time that they have. So let me start with you, Susan. Welcome.
Thanks very much. And I'll just check yes. So you can hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine.
All right. So thank you. And thanks for this this topic and this forum at such a key time, and particularly thanks for putting it, for making it specific to the ASEAN region, because the ASEAN region has a lot of very unique characteristics, which will be very important in tackling this global pandemic. So I work with GAVI, which is the Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation. And as you said, we are working really closely with CEPI, hand in hand with CEPI and with WHO, to form a core group with other partners to tackle, to design and create probably the largest operationalization of vaccines in this sort of time frame that's ever happened. And it's tough, it's exciting, it's the problem solving for every single part of it is fascinating. And what I'd like to do is to tell you a little bit about it. It is a global initiative, and to give you an idea of the scale of the initiative and why we're actually doing it and what we hope to achieve. It is an experiment. It's one that for many years, health experts, and you would know this, Michael, having worked at WHO, and in fact, all of the speakers would, we have predicted for many years there will be big pandemics. It is a huge global security threat. It is an enormous social threat. It's an enormous economic threat. And we have pushed for policymakers and politicians to give it the level of attention that it needs in order to prepare. And to an extent, some of that has been done, but now we're in it and we're trying to create a global solution that can get to every part of the world, every community in the world, to try to end the acute phase of the pandemic and recover from it. And hopefully, and this is what I think a challenge is for the ASEAN region, to use this as lessons learned for the next one, because there will be a next one. And this, hopefully, if nothing else, has taught us to think about how to get vaccines, the right kind of vaccines, the right kind of supply lines, to think through the policy and allocation and the financing aspects and the delivery aspects. So the objectives of the COVAX facility are to end the acute phase of the pandemic by the end of 2021. In order to do that, we anticipate we'll need to deliver at least 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. And to do this together, and this is where working with CEPI is key, is we're looking at a portfolio of vaccines, because until recently, we didn't know which vaccines would start making it through the research and delivery, the research and development and trial phase. We want to also have a human aspect to this, to try to guarantee a fair and equitable access to the vaccine, because as we have seen, the rich countries have the advantage of enough funds and to be able to go immediately into bilateral deals to secure for their populations. But that leaves an awful lot of people behind in a time where you have supply constraints. And we want to offer a compelling return on investment for that, because the economics of this are that it's costing a lot. It's costing a lot at a daily rate if you're looking at the increase in figures around poverty, the costs to the economy, the foregone working days, and so on. So we put out the concept together and said, you know, we have an ambition, join together, let's have a global solidarity effort. There was initial funding by a number of countries who said, yes, you know, we think that this is really important. We need to get together in a global solidarity effort. And we pushed the notion of vaccines, of immunization as a global public good, which is really the first time we've we've come out and seen the uptake of the concept of immunization as a global public good. And we've seen now that, the UN General Assembly, the World Health Assembly, the G20 have started echoing this notion of widespread immunization being a global public good. And we said, who wants in? And we have actually 189. So I think since April or May, when we put the call out, we have 189 participants now. I use the term participants because it includes countries, it includes territories, it includes economies. So we have 189 participants, and those participants cover about 90% of the world's population. And the COVAX facility is split into two buckets, if you like. One is fully self-financing countries. So they actually buy their doses through us, and that gives us the advantage of volume to work with manufacturers. And then we have the more traditional bucket, which we're calling the AMC, Advanced Market Commitment. And that is for 92 participants, economies, which are the low income and IDA eligible economies. And for that, that's pretty much overseas development funding will actually fund this bucket. So we said that we needed around 2 billion for the AMC aspect of this by the end of this year. And I'm glad to say that we've got that. And we've now got vaccines coming in. So we're now talking with countries about, okay, how can we have the delivery and supply lines ready? So this will be, in 2021, the largest and most rapid global deployment of vaccines. It's also, accidentally, I guess, a great shot in the arm for international cooperation. We've seen it's more and more difficult to get global solidarity efforts over the last decade or so. We've had the Sustainable Development Goals, but you know, it's been tricky in the multilateral space. But in this one, there is a huge amount of goodwill, a huge amount of recognition that it's a difficult task, but it is in everybody's interest to get there. So I think, you know, we've got plenty of information that in terms of the various aspects of operationalizing this. We have to think through the allocation, like who gets the vaccines first. And for us, we're prioritizing healthcare workers, people with comorbidities, vulnerable groups. And that's the basis on which we're discussing with countries in terms of the vaccine deployment. We have to think around the cold chain aspects of this. And so GAVI's made available a certain amount of funds through the GAVI board to start discussing with countries their cold chain needs. So there are various operational aspects of this that we're working on together, but I'm hoping that that gives you an idea of the scale of what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it. It's about equity. It's about trying to make sure that there is a reasonable amount of vaccines getting to low-income countries at the same time as high-income countries. And it is something that is multilateral and that we're problem solving together. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you, Michael, and the other speakers. Over.
Thank you, Susan. A very, very clear description of COVAX, which I'm sure is occupying all of your time right now, or most of your time. And all of your time. Quite a daring adventure. We'll come back and talk about it some more, I'm sure, after the other speakers. Luc, let me turn it over to you. And I think you're going to talk to us a little bit more from the aspect of the pharmaceutical sector. But welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike, and Susan. Thanks for laying out COVAX, where it's very important. I just want to reiterate, equitable access is a very important aspect of that. It's not just about vaccines, but it's making them available, because the concept is that a vaccine is only a vaccine when it's called vaccination, meaning a jab in the arm, and there's a lot that needs to happen, and I'm sure we will be discussing about that. What I will want to do in a few minutes is lay out a bit of my observation so far, but I would say my ex-industry hat, but also obviously working with CEPI, with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness. But because let's not forget that CEPI, This coalition was created after the devastating Ebola outbreak in West Africa, where the world actually opened its eyes and said, whoa, we're not prepared for this, to prevent epidemics like that and prevent them to become pandemics, actually. And so CEPI in 2017 was created at World Economic Forum, and was working on priority, is working on priority pathogens. But then suddenly, obviously, the remit changed. As Susan laid out, the remit of GAVI has changed when the pandemic hit us in January this year, because dealing with a pandemic is something different than preventing an epidemic. But that's what was laid out. So my observation so far is that, I mean, if you would have asked me 2 months ago, with my experience in the vaccines industry, 30 years of industry experience, that we would have 2 or 3 vaccines available since the outbreak in January or since the announcement of the genetic code, I would have said not possible. However, we should be very proud to see that we have seen unprecedented scientific collaboration across the world. And we can discuss geopolitics, but actually the good news is that geopolitics didn't get in the way of fantastic scientific collaborative efforts. Having said that, it is not so that people should think that in 300 days, Pfizer or Moderna have developed a new vaccine. Actually, this is decades of prior investment in the scientific community in basic research that now has resulted in this accelerated scientific effort to get to a vaccine. And we can come later to that, because ultimately it's about creating those enabling conditions, and which are also true, you know, for the ASEAN or for the Asian region, you know, to make sure that we are better prepared for the future. So the first observation is absolutely unprecedented. I've never seen this in my career, this acceleration, because things were not done sequential, but at risk, and very collaborative with regulators, with scientists, with everybody who could make an effort to accelerate this development. But it's leveraging prior preparedness. Let's not forget about that. And we should think about that, how we prepare for the future. The second thing that I've observed is, Julio Frank wrote already in 2013, the paradox of sovereignty. There's no such a thing as a global medical governance. There's not even, I mean, I'm a Belgian. Even in Europe, there's no such a thing as a European health minister or anything like that. And I'm interested to hear how the ASEAN region is looking at that. But, you know, from a governance perspective, very difficult. So you have this paradox of sovereignty, because a minister of health obviously is very responsible for the citizens of his or her country. But at the same time, we all know that to solve this global problem of a pandemic, we need to work together, and we need to make sure that vaccines are available across the world. And I think for the future, we need to plan differently for this, because we've seen actually a scramble of bilateral deals, and then the COVAX facilities, and then certain regions like US going on their own. So we need to plan differently for that. And then the third observation that I want to share is, and of course you can say I'm biased, but what we can observe is that without multinational companies, we cannot achieve what we are achieving now, which is in this record time, first of all, let the science result into a vaccine. But secondly, also the scaling up, which is very important to make sure that we have enough vaccines, because demand will massively outstrip the supply that we have, at least in 2021. And the good news here is that research institutes, universities play a very important role in the innovation cycle. But at the same time, we need to match them with those multinational companies who have the power and the muscle and the experience to pull it through end to end, because what we're talking about is an end-to-end challenge. And I think again here that we need to think forward, because coming from the industry, having gone through pandemic flu in 2009, Ebola in West Africa and in DRC, there's a massive opportunity cost, but there's an innovation incentive. And how do we balance that actually to make sure that all the parties needed to accelerate the effort continue to come to the table and are continuously interested to come to the table? And then an observation that I have, where I think it's very frustrating, and that's probably one of the first things we need to solve, is that it's appalling that we need to raise money during a crisis. imagine it was a war. I mean, we would be investing because a percentage of GDP is predefined to invest when things happen like that. Stimulations happen all the time. And now we're facing a pandemic and we're still scrambling for money. I mean, Susan could have laid out, we're still looking for 800 million, you know, just for the R&D piece of COVAX. However, I mean, for any economist, the investment case is clearly made. We know what we need to do. Every dollar that you spend actually on this pandemic returns $5. Is recently in a RAND study, a European organization that has published this study of the economics, you know, how important it is to look after the world and not just after yourself. So the rich economies need to continue to invest to make sure that the whole world has access to this. So these are kind of my observations from the first 10 months or 11 months of this pandemic. And just to stimulate the discussion afterwards, I mean, some key suggestions for me is that we need to lay out clearly what the role is of a nation, what the role is of a region, and what a global role is for a CEPI or a COVAX-like organization, so that we don't need to figure that out. Because I think it's Barclay who often uses it when he addresses audiences about COVAX. We're building a boat whilst going into a storm on the sea, and that should not happen again. So how can we be better prepared? And therefore we need to lay out those different layers, because national research institutes are very important for the initiation of research projects and doing basic research, and we need to make sure that nations can do that. But at the same time, regions like the ASEAN regions need to realize that it's impossible to have infrastructure for vaccine development in every single country. You cannot have the aspiration to have a vaccine plant on everybody's soil to ensure distribution and so on. What the challenge is that we need to wire actually what is already there, or invest in capacity that we can keep warm during peacetime, and that we can then deploy during, I would say, crisis time. And it's a matter of wiring that capacity. So linking that, and that's a regional endeavor that can never be a national challenge. And then obviously the globe, as we know, that we can only get out of this crisis by a global collaborative effort. And COVAX is absolutely, Susan, you used the word experiment. I think it's more than an experiment. I think we're actually realizing it, but what it is, it wasn't prepared. So we spend lots of time, I'm very frustrated, we spend lots of time in governance. It's not clearly always laid out whose the roles and responsibilities are. Let's get our act together for the future. And we have some good examples. Mike, you know, from the US, I mean, there is the US BARDA organization. Ursula von der Leyen in Europe has expressed in her State of the Union that she wants to create a European BARDA. We're in the midst of those discussions. And I think the ASEAN region, or even a bigger region, should think about, should we have our own BARDA as well, which basically connects those dots of basic research in the nation, regional capacity, and financing efforts laying out for the region, and then making sure it's connected to the world, so that things, when they need to be ignited or when we need to do the surveillance or testing and so on, that the world is connected and wired. So I think there are examples on what we need to do, and then enable that ecosystem. So it's creating an enabling ecosystem, I would say. As much as CEPI was created 2017 to prevent for epidemics, I think we now should have learned our lessons and make sure that we get to a permanent organization that can connect those dots. And then last but not least, I would say, what are the key factors? I think it's, I have 4 buckets actually that I'd like to discuss.
We need to wrap up. If you could go and just wrap up.
Absolutely. I'll finish with my 4 buckets, because that should stimulate a discussion probably. Science is one thing. Financials, we've spoken about that. Sustainable financing is the second one. But the third one is political leadership that you need to make those 2 first ones happen. And what I've learned through this pandemic is that absolutely engaged citizenship is the 4th bucket that we need to activate. So if we can activate those 4 buckets, then I think we can do a better job for the future. But let's be happy of where we are at this moment. And I'll leave it over to you, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Luc. Really wonderful overview of many issues, some of which I'm sure we'll come back to. let me ask now Krishna to, we've heard from CEPI and we've heard from GAVI all their aspirations, but let's take a check, Krishna, on, I know you're going to tell us where we really are right now with regard to access.
Great, thank you, Mike, and fantastic to hear from Susan and, and from Luc as well, and laying out some of the context of where we are. For the last 2 years, obviously predating this global pandemic, our team has been through the Launch and Scale Speedometer developing the framework by which to actually measure our success as a global community at going through the end-to-end research and development, scale up all the way to the last mile, excuse me, of various global health interventions. And you'll see some of the early work here in terms of a data framework by which we can track this, some of the early findings across different product categories and therapeutic areas. The other thing we've also done is bring together a community of key stakeholders from both the public and private sector to have a better understanding. And as we've already heard, much of what we're doing is an attempt to accelerate pathways much beyond what they've been in the past. We have fantastic progress to show for the development of vaccines. Whether that translates to vaccinations at scale is to be determined. But part of our role as an academic organization is to actually generate and share the evidence, both to support better decision-making in real time and to help us prepare for stronger responses in the future. And so we pivoted when we saw the global pandemic and the global response earlier this year to really taking a look at how we could study the response across everything from the partnerships that are being developed and its governance to the vaccine development, distribution, all the way to what's happening in terms of therapeutics and diagnostics around the world, relying both on publicly available data as well as key informant interviews. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see the URL. If you go to launchandscalefaster.org and click on COVID-19, you can follow along and you can see all of our data that's now purely publicly available. And so similar to immunization being a global public good, we're trying to unlock the power of data as a global public good so that we can all make better decisions. So some of our early work has really been around understanding, building from a lot of the points that Susan made, what is actually happening from moving to good intent to actual work on the ground. So before the first vaccine outside of a clinical trial actually made it to a jab and arm, we've seen more than 7 billion doses of vaccines already purchased. And more than half of those by high-income countries through bilateral deals. So almost 4 billion doses, and this is increasing by the day as we're tracking it. If you look at upper middle-income countries and lower middle-income countries, you'll see they're anywhere from 1 billion to 1.8 billion. In the lower middle-income country, the bulk of that is in India, largely based on their manufacturing capacity in the private sector through the Serum Institute of India. And again, COVAX has secured to date purchases of about 700 million doses. The goal, as we heard, is 2 billion doses by the end of 2021, and that's in a context where we will likely have about 10 billion total purchases of doses by that point in time. So while we can talk about the role of COVAX, I think some of the questions we're raising is what's actually happening. If we break that down by country, you'll see that the US and the EU as a region really are above and beyond most others, but you also see while the numbers for Canada don't rise to the surface by pure numbers, they've secured enough purchases to cover their entire population 5 times over based on the advanced purchases so to date. And in the table, you'll see we've pulled some of the data for what's publicly available for some of the countries in the ASEAN region. And you can see some of the major discrepancies between Indonesia, for example, that is an AMC eligible participant in COVAX with a population of 270 million and advanced purchases bilaterally of over 350 million doses versus Philippines with 100 million plus population with publicly available data showing less than 3 million purchases. So we have a huge discrepancy even regionally amongst who's going to have access to vaccine when. Now, if we keep looking at this by vaccine candidate, and if we look down at the Pfizer and Moderna, the 2 mRNA platform candidates that are soon to be available, at least in high-income countries, you will see that the predominant purchases have been by high-income countries, if you look at the table here. And what also is becoming clear is that the world is making a big bet on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, more than 2.5 billion doses already bought, and especially for 300 to 500 million doses that are going to go through the COVAX facility. So while we've seen some hiccups in the clinical trials for that vaccine, we really need it to work if we're going to see some vaccinations occur in the near term in low and middle income countries. This is a little hard to see, but what we've also tried to show here is where we are in terms of what percent of populations can be covered. So just the pure numbers bought don't quite get that. But we've also shown here on the x-axis what's happening in terms of the COVID burden in each of these countries as one marker of local need. And you'll see that there's no real correlation here at all. So it's much more based on purchasing power than it is need. And so one of the key questions that need to be raised is, even amongst the COVAX distribution and allocation plans, is burden of disease going to be considered as part of the distribution and allocation strategy? So what we're starting to see beyond just the pure numbers that we need to track in terms of ensuring some sort of equitable vaccine allocation, first is timing. We should celebrate enormous milestones in the rapid development of vaccine candidates, but we don't know the timing of when any specific candidate is going to become available and approved through appropriate regulatory channels in specific countries or jurisdictions. The second, manufacturing is highly dynamic. We've seen, for example, from the Pfizer-BioNTech candidate, initial indications of 100 million doses being possible in 2020, that being pulled back to 50 million. And we think that some of the other candidates, like the AZ and Oxford, have a much higher probability of scaling manufacturing quickly. And we are starting to see more regional manufacturing capacity come online in low and middle income countries, which is a fantastic sign of progress. So if you look at these candidates, they can't manufacture within the next 6 months how much has already been purchased. And we're already starting to see high income countries elbowing their way in to try to get dibs in sorts of who's going to get their vaccine first. So that's going to play out in the geopolitics, as we heard, in the coming months. And where is COVAX in line for some of these candidates as they come through? And then, of course, there will and already have been unanticipated complications. So how do we deal with that? We do need a portfolio of candidates to be successful, but we also need contingency planning at every step of the way, with supply chain and cold chain, with distribution and last mile. So what we see as really critical needs that need to be addressed beyond the allocation into distribution is certainly, as Luc mentioned, the supply chain, the supplies, the workforce, the data systems, and of course the confidence in the system to bring it all together in terms of acceptance and hesitancy. And so I won't cover this again, because Susan, I think, did a great job of covering COVAX and this ACT-A platform, the ACT Accelerator, co-convened by WHO, GAVI, and CEPI, as what we're seeing as the leading multilateral platform to try to bring the world together. And as you heard, 189 participants so far that are either AMC eligible or self-financing. The goal, we also heard already, is 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. But also, I think we need to take a reality check here of even Dr. Tedros in the last week at the UNGA special session said very clearly, unless the ACT-A is fully funded, in his words, it's in danger of becoming no more than a noble gesture. And I think that's exactly right. So our immediate funding gap is 4.3 billion and 24 billion US dollars needed urgently for 2021 for ACT-A to be effective. And to put that in context, the G20 economies thus far have provided $11 trillion of stimulus packages in their own economies. We're talking about less than 1/2% of what the G20 has already done in stimulus required for ACT-A across 189 jurisdictions just for COVAX to be more effective, which raises the question of what's happening here. If we really believe in multilateralism, and if we really believe that this is the platform to make it happen, how in the world are we not able to raise the funding? 23 billion may seem like a lot, but not in context of what the world's already put on the table. So can multilateralism move beyond a noble gesture? And if it's not Act A and COVAX, then what? And just yesterday, Foreign Affairs came out with this debate statement that you'll see on the right, that the world needs a new global health entity to better detect and respond to pandemics. And you'll see the numbers on the bottom right there across a network of global health experts that they've asked. And clearly, we are not in any consensus across the world in terms of just our global health governance experts on whether the WHO and Act A and others already serve that purpose, or whether we need to create yet another global health entity. So we've got some serious challenges ahead of us if we're going to see some of these things through. I'll leave with this, what we think are appropriate considerations. The first is, I think we've got a communications problem. We have got to not only recognize the equity and humanitarian considerations and equitable distributions, but really make more effective the arguments for economic and health implications, even in high-income countries, to have equitable global distribution. The modeling is there, the data is there. Clearly, the evidence shows that we have not made the argument well enough if we're not seeing reasonable dollars flow through. Second, we've got to actually be serious about equity beyond talking about it. What are our measures of equity? At the global level, we're starting to track who's getting vaccines at a country level, but it's got to track much beyond that. If a low-income country gets vaccine and it's only high-income people in low-income countries that have access to it, that's not actually helping equity either. So how do we start tracking at the level of subpopulations and subnationally and disaggregate the data to get serious about equity? And then as our key learnings so far, one, we have got to have stronger LMIC leadership in regional and global partnerships. We're starting to see that happen. I look forward to the discussion of how that's happening in the future in the ASEAN region. We've got to increase manufacturing capacity in low and middle income countries, as we've started to see in India, in Brazil, in South Africa, and I think we're going to hear about Thailand. That capacity creates a change in the power dynamics and allows LMICs and regions to be more strongly in control of distribution. We've got to have additional funding. That's just a no-brainer for this to work. And then I put the IP-related considerations here, recognizing it's not a key part of our discussion today, but is an important piece to tackle over time. So I will end there, and I very much look forward to the upcoming discussion.
Thank you, Krishna. So we've had three wonderful presentations. We've heard wonderful aspirations from COVAX and CEPI, and WHO being part of that. And now Krishna has given us a reality check on where we are today and what it's going to take to get us where we want to get. I was initially thinking I might ask the three of you a few questions, but given time, I'd like to go right to our country representatives here. And I'll come back, and particularly I want to talk about the ASEAN region with regard to COVAX and CEPI and the private sector. But let's hear from our three country representatients or spokespersons, and we have three. Their names are here. And let me ask, rather than a formal presentation, let me start by asking each of our distinguished participants, Ren from Singapore, Nakorn from Thailand, and Erlina from Indonesia. Let me ask Ren first. What you have a good sense of the ASEAN region. What insights can you share on the challenges faced by the ASEAN region and their plans for dealing with some of the challenges that we've just heard about in the first 30 minutes? Ren?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Well, just to put into context, ASEAN is a coalition of 10 countries, and the total population is about 670 million. This is about twice that of the United States and just a little shy of what the EU population is. So getting everyone vaccinated is a big challenge because the countries are all separated by physical geographies. Within each country itself, they also have access issues in terms of rural versus urban areas. So I would say the ground challenges, which is the topic which this webinar is about, really impacts ASEAN in a very, I would say, complete way. And from my perspective, I see that there are 4 issues facing equitable access of vaccines to ASEAN countries. The first is timing. We really need to have it fast. And as you can see from Krishna's presentation and Luc's presentation, is that some of the countries are getting it faster than others. Partly also because sometimes certain of the countries in ASEAN have their own national priorities, and the perception of the threat may not be as acute in certain countries in ASEAN compared to others. For example, Indonesia and Philippines are facing something like 3,000 to 5,000 cases a day. Vietnam is in the region of maybe like 20, 30. So those perception of threat can be impacting upon how they actually move in terms of trying to get hold of the vaccines. The second issue that ASEAN faces is that of volume. That relates to the 670 million people that you want to vaccinate. You probably won't get 100% of them vaccinated, but it's still a very considerable number. Third is regard to the quality of the vaccines. There are different vaccines available now, but then can we actually get hold of vaccine qualities that will then be protective? And finally, the issue of cost, which GAVI, CEPI are looking at through COVAX. Vaccines are expensive, and not all countries can get it all at the same time. So those are the 4 issues that really impacts upon ASEAN. And they need to be resolved very fast. And I'm glad to see that COVAX is going some way to resolve that, but I'm not sure whether that will be timely enough to solve it. So just very quickly, Luc pointed out that is there a coordinating center for this kind of issues? And the answer is yes and no. ASEAN has a science and technology innovation framework in place. ASEAN has a lot of regional cooperation across many platforms, and science and technology is one of them. The committees meet twice a year. It goes up to ministerial level. And at the most recent one, about a few weeks ago, the PMs of every country does mention that they would need to work closer together. There's probably no good solution in the short term, except that we really need to get the vaccines, perhaps through COVAX. But on a longer term basis, for the next pandemic, there has to be some kind of regional cooperation in terms of setting up perhaps a regional manufacturing. And here, I'm glad to see that both Indonesia and Philippines, with great experience in producing local produced vaccines of high quality, do have the infrastructure there that forms the foundation by which perhaps ASEAN can get together and start some kind of regional manufacturing framework, either from self-innovated vaccines or through licensing from existing commercial partners from the US or Europe. So I'll just quickly stop there and then pass the time to 2 of my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren. And your experience with the ASEAN science and technology is extremely valuable, and I'm very grateful for your insights on that. Now, Korn, let me turn to you next. You direct a key vaccine institute in Thailand, and I know Thailand has been on the forefront for years on these issues. Could you comment on your institute's work, the country's commitment to getting vaccine and producing vaccine, and how your country really is stepping up to meet the challenges of COVID?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Michael. And I would like to address one by one point. For the production capacity, we have a very good collaboration right now that has just been recently established among the partner of our local company, namely Siam Bioscience, which is a company that actually formerly they are a kind of protein and biosimilar manufacturer, such as erythropoietin and the other antibody or the other protein for the therapeutic protein. But Siam Bioscience agrees to repurpose their facility to be able to produce the viral vector vaccine with the collaboration with AstraZeneca and Oxford University. So Siam Simin Group is another private sector that help us on connecting the collaboration between Oxford University, AstraZeneca, and Siam Bioscience. So by this collaboration work, meaning that Siam Bioscience will be a contract manufacturer of AstraZeneca, and by the capacity of producing the vaccine in around 200 million doses per year. So that it's a kind of establishing of supply capacity in the region, because we have a letter of intent together with AstraZeneca, Siam Bioscience, and SCG, as well as the Ministry of Public Health Thailand, that the vaccine which will be produced by Siam Bioscience will be share or export within the ASEAN region. And Thailand has just make a kind of advance agreement of the supply from this capacity for only 26 million doses in 2021. So the remaining capacity or doses can be shared and export to our neighboring country. And I can echo the point from Dr. Krishna that this will be the future manufacturing capacity of viral vector vaccine technology platform, that it has been proved already by COVID-19 situation that viral vector vaccine will be one of the platform that can respond to the situation in a timely manner. So by setting this capacity, I think it will not be only Thailand, and so it can serve on our work on ASEAN vaccine security and self-reliance, which we has been discussing for a period of time, that we are trying to set up the ASEAN vaccine security and self-reliance. And to meet that challenge, we need around 6 months of work. Actually, the work has been started since October. We would expect that not more than the first half of 2021, the capacity of Siam Bioscience will be ready for vaccine production. A part of that, Thai government also funding, give a fund to Siam Bioscience in around 20 million US dollars to improve their manufacturing capacity to be ready for technology transfer from AstraZeneca and Oxford University. So I think this point will be a good start, and we can work more on vaccine supply for the region with our ASEAN member states. So over to you, Dr. Michael, if you have another point that would ask me.
Yeah, Nakorn, do you have any idea what % of the ASEAN need Thailand can provide?
As said that it's around 2 million doses per year that we have had in hand for the
2 million
moment.
doses, okay.
No, 200 million doses.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
200 million doses. But as said that Thailand has reserved or advanced the doses for around 26 million doses.
Okay, thank you.
So the remaining can be shared. And I would adding the point that if the regimen of AstraZeneca vaccine will be changed from 2 full dose to be a kind of half dose and full dose regimen. So the capacity will be increased automatically by 25%. So it will become 250 million doses per year by that.
Okay,
by that
thank you.
regimen. So that we can work together more on the vaccine supply for the region.
Okay, thank you. Arlena, I know you are a clinician and you deal with patients, but I know you've been thinking about some of the more challenging issues that your country faces, both in terms of supply and vaccine hesitancy. So Arlena, tell us what your own assessment of the situation in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you, Michael. My country, Indonesia, got really hit badly with this COVID-19, with almost 600,000 confirmed cases so far, with more than 17,000 death mortality. Yeah, so we are really in a bad situation, and also the incident is increasing day by day. Even we got 3 days ago, we have like 6 to 8,000 cases in one day. So as a clinician, my colleague and our other professional organization are really worried, since the hospital now is over capacity. So the prevention is really, really important. So we are really get a very high hope on this vaccine. Our government declared that we will need to have like 250 to 300 million doses. But what I heard so far, the country is only having the let's say contract with Sinovac so far. And in fact, 2 days ago, December 7, the 3 million to 15 million vaccine already arrived in Indonesia. But that is a small amount of what we need actually. We don't hear that the country has like collaboration with Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca or other, but only Sinovac. So we are a bit worried. And actually, there are also survey being conducted in the community to see the acceptance of the population regarding this vaccine. And actually, many of us, I mean the population, they were not so certain about this effectivity of the vaccine that we are having right now, since there is no declaration of the efficacy of the vaccine. We heard that Pfizer have more than 90% of efficacy, and also Moderna have around 94%, but we never heard that Sinovac already declared their efficacy. In fact, in our country, we are waiting for the good efficacy, good safety profile, and also since we are majority are Muslim, we are also put a halal vaccine as one of the ideal criteria. So I wonder, well, before that, I would like also to mention that actually in the country itself, we are developing our own vaccine. We call it a merah putih, meaning red, white. That is our flag. The merah putih vaccine is being developed in 6 institutions right now, but we are still way to go. We heard that they finished doing this research in the middle of 2022. So they are long time to go actually, but they're still working on it. We do hope that this is a big success, since until now we only have collaboration with Sinovac and only 3 million to 15 million vaccine in the country. This is really not a good situation actually. So in terms of that, I would like to ask to the speakers, when you make a consideration for vaccine distribution, is the country with very high incident included in one of your priority, or only those countries who can pay in advance? Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
Yes, and Erlina, you have really brought us back to reality, and thank you for your frankness. Let me, Amina, I don't see questions and answers, so I'm going to, any questions in the inbox from any of the audience. So let me ask Susan or Luke and Krishna. You've heard now from our ASEAN reality. Please react and tell all of us here today, what are we going to do to meet the situation that they face right now? What is the reality, and what is that you can really help them do? Any Luke or Susan or Krishna, any of you want to answer them? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I can give a few early thoughts to this. So Dr. Elena, thank you very much. I found that absolutely, I was glued to your giving that reality check. And it's good for us to be able to hear that. What we're trying to do is make the global facility, get the volume in, get the funding in, and negotiate with manufacturers on the deals and the prices, because we don't want the cost of the vaccine to be a barrier to access to the vaccine. And it's really good to be able to work with the countries themselves, with donors and funders on this, and also with the multilateral development banks. So all of us together are trying to find ways to finance, to create access at speed and at scale. How this works at country level, the countries themselves tell us how much they want to buy. So it's actually the countries who come to us and say, we would like to go through the facility for 10%, 15%, 20% of our population. So they come to us and we discuss and set up the contracts on that basis. So as we saw in Krishna's graph earlier, Indonesia, well, we're working with a number of countries in the ASEAN region. But I do want to make that point that, you know, the whole point of this global effort, you're right, Luke, it is a massive global effort, is to try to get access and equity. We're also working with countries at the same time on identifying the most vulnerable populations. And so GAVI is about to start its 5th strategy. And the focus for that strategy is on what we call zero dose populations. So those 10% of children who don't even get the first shot. And so in doing that work with countries and setting up for the next strategy, we are actually working country by country at trying to identify the missed communities, the missed populations, and so on. And I think we can bring this thinking into it. And we're working with UNICEF and with WHO and with civil society and others in this effort. I also wanted to pick up on another aspect of this, which is we can supply the vaccine through UNICEF or through PAHO in Latin America, working with others to get it there. but the communities themselves need to trust and want the vaccine. And that's where healthcare providers like you, Dr. Elena, are absolutely key, and Nakorn, where your work is absolutely key, because we have to create that trust in something which has been done very fast to solve a global pandemic. And there is a lot of misinformation around. We will see that, and we need to be able to work with community leaders and healthcare providers and governments on this aspect. And then one last point I wanted to make, coming into Luc's mention of Ebola before. When Ebola was absolutely raging, a little known fact is that measles spiked enormously. And so one of the things that you see with a pandemic, you tell people to stay home, there's a huge amount of fear, there's widespread COVID in the communities, and entire birth cohorts start missing out on routine immunization. So as well as fixing COVID, we need to go back with catch-up campaigns and help with those missed routine immunizations so we don't get spikes of other diseases in the community. So I think given the time, I'll leave it there, but they were just a few
Susan,
thoughts from some of the speakers.
Thank you. Luc, can you briefly respond? And what are the companies going to do now? We are so far from meeting the need. How are the companies going to help COVAX? How are they going to help make their vaccines available? If we think back to the first seminar in this series, there was a lot of talk of compulsory licensing. I don't want to revisit that. But what do you think, Luc? How's the industry going to help us here? With HIV drugs, they were slow off the mark. So what's going to happen here?
Well, first of all, I mean, obviously I cannot speak on behalf of the industry, but I can give an industry perspective. And what I've heard in the very important last three sessions was there's a lack of scale and there's a lack of diversity, because the perverse effect of Moderna and Pfizer looks like everybody's waiting tomorrow to have that vaccine on their doorstep. Let's face a bit of reality, meaning the scale that is needed across the world will need to allow for the first half of 21 to get things right. What I mean with that is, I mean, at COVAX, we have at CEPI, we have a portfolio of 9 vaccines where in different phases, of course, but we automatically made deals with those companies, and that's where I get to the companies, that they had to have geographical spread of their manufacturing capacity. So if we think about Novavax, which we saw in the very good slides of Krishna, you know, of Novavax and AstraZeneca, this is not just doses, but there's also geographical spread of production. And we just heard from Nakorn as well that they made these tech transfers, which immediately makes me jump, and we will not get into the IP discussion, but IP is not the issue. I can give you the IP book tomorrow, you know, but you will not be able to make a vaccine. What you need is tech transfer. And that's what CEPI has enabled, is tech transfer capability, you know, so that local manufacturers can start distributing those, or making and then distributing those vaccines. And so my message here is that we need to continue to invest in a diverse portfolio. We need to look into the diversity of, or the geographical spread of the manufacturing effort. J&J, we didn't mention the vaccine. J&J is also a vector-based vaccine. They are already tech transferring their vaccine to BioE in India, and BioE has made a commitment to then, and J&J, to make that vaccine available to the AMC countries. So again, that's an important vaccine that will read out before the end of this year, beginning of next year, so that by mid-half 2021, we will also be able to distribute that vaccine, because otherwise we will rely too much on the AstraZeneca vaccine or the Novavax vaccine. So diversity of portfolio is needed, scale is needed, and I think we need to give ourselves a bit of time that we don't get blindfolded. Pfizer, Moderna, great, but actually they're not the best vaccines for AMC countries, and we did assess that. I mean, Susan, you can confirm that. We did assess that with AMC countries. I mean, the cold chain is just horrendous, even for developed countries. We will see now how it goes in the US, in UK, where they start vaccinations, but shipping things at -80 across so many countries is a real challenge, and they will continue to work on thermostability going forward, you know. But let's not get sidetracked by an RNA vaccine. We need all the vaccines, and Erlina, I mean, this morning they published their phase 3 data, Sinovac actually, or Sinopharm, you know, that they reach 87% of efficacy with their vector. It's the Ad5 vector that they use, which has its ups and downs. So we need to see more data to be able to judge, obviously, on that vaccine. But it was published this morning, actually, just to respond to your question. So that's my message. And I think the industry has stepped up and has spoken out that they want to make their vaccines available across the world. And we see that in the commitments of AstraZeneca, of Johnson & Johnson, of Novavax, you know, and even Pfizer, Moderna, we're negotiating COVAX Facility, is negotiating with them to get those doses. But it was mentioned already, their scale up, they've never done this before. So the scale up has their issues. Pfizer has already halved indeed the number of doses they can liberate. So I think they I mean, not defending them, but they've stepped up to that, because they need to continue to do business there as well, you know, across the world. They're global companies. I am sure that by the middle of 2021, the picture will look different. But we need to continue to focus on it and work together. So that's my message.
Thank you, Luc, and thank you for bringing the mRNA vaccines to reality, because
Michael,
that is what.
Can I ask a question, please?
I'll come to you in a minute, Arena. I'll come to you in a minute, okay? Krishna, do you want to react at all?
Sure, very briefly. I'd say first to recognize, I think GAVI is one of the best organizations we have in global health and has done phenomenal work. I think CEPI has done incredible work in a very short period of time. But we also have to recognize COVAX is really shaky from a governance perspective, from a financing perspective. We've got to create stronger multinational platforms if we're going to make this a reality. So there is no other platform. So I think, you know, we've got to continue to strengthen ACT-A and COVAX for this to be the global multilateral response. Secondly, from the perspective of ASEAN, of an individual country, I would say we've got to understand that a single multilateral platform will not be the only answer. So I think we see low-income countries, especially, in a really hard position where they're largely relying on COVAX to be the mechanism, and our best case scenario is 20% by the end of 2021, which gets us nowhere near herd immunity. So I think we should also anchor ourselves on the reality that for most low and middle income countries, and perhaps many high income countries, we're 2, 3, or 4 years away from reaching herd immunity through effective vaccinations. So we cannot go away from effective and day-to-day public health measures in the meantime. I think the risk we have is that we become complacent because we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and things may well get worse before they get better. And the last point I'll add is it's great to hear the work that the Vaccine Institute is doing in Thailand. I do think regional cooperation is a really important aspect, and ASEAN, I think, has as good a chance as any regional cooperation body of creating strength and solidarity and both supply and demand side effectiveness for COVID.
Okay, now Korn and Ren, I'm going to come back to that at the end, but let me ask Erlina, I know you want to react.
Yes, thank you, Luc, for your information that CanSino have 80% of efficacy, but the thing is, we don't, in the country, we don't have CanSino. We have Sinovac, which we do not have the information of the efficacy. That's one thing. The second is, can this platform, COVAX, helping my government to attach with this producer of vaccine? Because I think if the country only have one kind of vaccine, that will impact to the cost.
Luc, you have a quick response? I want a very quick response, Luc.
Well, I mean, I don't think an individual country should try to have vaccine production on its soil. It's a regional effort, and I think it's a matter of Indonesia to make sure they link with the region, and that then they can look into how they can solve that problem for the future. In the short term, it's not a solution, of course, because tech transfers take time to do that. And I wasn't commenting on CanSino, actually. It was Sinopharm that published their efficacy this morning.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Nakorn, can you, and Ren, let me start with Nakorn. Talk about ASEAN. How is ASEAN going to step up now?
So I think we have a platform of AVSSR. If we would like to start, we need to start off sharing information first to see. I think we don't know exactly for the advanced supply agreement that each country has done, as well as the AMC for that will be supported by the COVAX facility, so that we will know the baseline of vaccine access in each country. So then by that database of the baseline, we can decide more precisely on the supply distribution to each country with the limited doses that we have had in hand in around 200 to 250 million doses per year, that we can use it strategically in the prioritized group of population, so that we can start from that part, and then the more doses can be get from the other platform, as well as we will have maybe the Chinese vaccine that we're really close to our region. And I think the point of we have got from the news that Indonesia has a large capacity of bulk finishing, and also Thailand and Vietnam, we also have a facility of bulk finishing. So imported bulk of vaccine, we can accelerate of the supply within the region. So that's another platform of approach that we can increase supply in the region. And to Dr. Rina, I think by the result of Sinopharm this morning of 86%, it's the same platform of inactivated platform of the vaccine, same as Sinovac vaccine. So I would guess that it will be the same, or quite the same, of the efficacy. This is my guess, because it's the same platform of inactivation vaccine. So meaning that at least Indonesia, which has secured the doses from Sinovac, you will have some doses of vaccine over there. So those are the approach that I would think, and well, we have things to discuss more. And I would think about the external support as well, in both technical and financing to ASEAN region, because we have a diversity of socioeconomic. We have a high income country like Singapore, and we have an upper middle income country like Thailand. We have a lower middle income country. So we have a diversity of socioeconomic, and we think that the external support from developmental agency would help us on accelerating of the supply within the region. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Ren. Maybe you can be our final commenter. Can you reflect a little bit on what you've heard?
Yes. So yeah, thank you, Mike. I think many experts have already said that the vaccines are not a panacea. So we cannot expect that the vaccines will solve all the problems. For ASEAN in particular, I think it is very important still for the governments to have the population observe all the safe practices of safe distancing, wearing masks, and so on. What this will do is effectively flatten the curve. It will draw out the necessity in terms of time to have vaccines to be brought into the country. I mean, right now there's definitely a crunch in terms of the shortage of vaccine. There's a supply issue. Thailand can produce 200 million doses, which is fantastic. I think that would go some ways to helping the surrounding countries. And of course, we count on COVAX. But in reality, I think even if we were to look at a very optimistic case where, let's say you were, over the next 6 to 8 months or 9 months, going to bring in sufficient vaccine for even, say, 300 million people, to cover, half the population. I mean, that still does not take away the risk that you will still find pretty rampant COVID in many parts of ASEAN. So at the moment, I think that low tech in terms of educating the population to do all the necessity of the health management to flatten the curve is the best thing we can do now. And then as the vaccine supplies become more abundant in late 2021 and 2022, we will then be able still to vaccinate properly a large number of the population with very effective vaccines. So I do think that right now, although everyone is focused on vaccines, we shouldn't really think that if we don't get our hands on the vaccines, that's going to be, like doomsday for ASEAN, because I think it's very important for the countries to save practice. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those final words. I think they're very cogent. Let me thank the speakers. I think we've had a wonderful, frank discussion, a very realistic discussion, and to be continued, I'm sure, as we move forward. This is a discussion that changes by the day. Amina, back to you.
Yeah.
May I add one more point? That's a
Please
small.
go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. I'm a part of supply of the vaccine. I think that the effective distribution or vaccination program of the country will be the crucial things for the near future. We need to establish maybe the new system. Even for Thailand, even we think that we have a good EPI program for the current time, but COVID-19 vaccination program will be totally different from our routine immunization. So that a kind of effective distribution will be a crucial point. And WHO has established a vaccine readiness assessment tool. So, but just a paper would not help us. So we need to help each other within the region, as well as from the technical support from WHO, from the other academia that can help each country to effectively conduct the vaccination program. Over to you.
That's a very good point. The standard EPI delivery system is not a perfect match by any means. And that's a very, very important point. Amina, I won't try to summarize, we're late, but please close our session.
I will just say, of course, a big thank you to all the participants. It's been really interesting to have all of you. And as Mike said, we hope to continue the discussion. I will just have one closing statement of which, hearing all the stuff that we talked about today, combining it with kind of some of the topics we covered in webinar 1, it just kind of brought home that I think the title of the series, which was started with Beyond Science, really was a point to drive home that, yes, of course, there are huge scientific issues, but even more importantly are all these other issues, when it comes to how are we really going to deal with this. So I do feel kind of these are the points that we need to continue to focus on and continue to kind of talk to each other about. Yeah, and as Susan says, the science is the easy part. So definitely these are lots of important things that we'll continue to talk about. This is our last webinar for this year. We'll be continuing it, and I'm sure we'll be in touch with all of you. So thank you all to the audience for being with us, to the participants, the speakers and the panelists, and to the moderator, Mike. And hope we'll, see, as they said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Let's make our way through that tunnel now. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.